All right, so welcome to today's IG English live lesson. I would like to, we finished off looking at Dead Poets Society, and today we are going to look at some First World War poetry. So obviously there were two world wars, and I think the First World War poetry is quite interesting because it's the first time in history that we get an insight into the kinds of effects war would have at this grand scale. And so it's quite an important chapter in the history of poetry to look at First World War poetry. Now, don't worry, you're not going to be examined on First World poetry. However, knowing about the First World War and the Second World Wars, or history in general, will help you in when you write your answers to things, if you have general knowledge about the world, and it will help you to hone in on your analysis skills to improve your analysis skills, which is why we look at poetry from time to time, because I want you to be a bit more challenged than just having to face the text that you look at in the textbook. Okay, right, good. Got that explanation out the way. Now, let's have a look at the poems, at a background first, at the background to World War I. So I've just taken out an explanation from Wikipedia. You can all access this yourselves, just to give you a bit more of a reference or an idea of what was going on in the First World War. So I've got a page of this, and then we'll actually look at the two poems that I have posted on the poetry forums for you to look at. Okay. So what was World War I all about? Well, it was also known as the First World War or the Great War. It was a global war, and this had never happened before, a global war originating in Europe that lasted from the 28th of July 1914 to the 11th of November 1918. So it was just over 4 years worth of fighting. Contemporaneously described as the war to end all wars. That means at the time, this was how they described it, contemporary to their time, it was described as a war to end all wars. It led to the mobilization of more than 70 million military personnel. Look how many people were involved. It's huge, including 60 million Europeans, making it one of the largest wars in history. It's also one of the deadliest conflicts in history, with an estimated 9 million combatants and 7 million civilian deaths as a direct result of the war, while resulting genocides and the resulting 1918 influenza pandemic caused another 50 to 100 million deaths worldwide. Wow, nothing here but happiness and laughs. No, it was a really, really horrific time and horrific event. And it would involve a lot of trench warfare. And so the poets we're looking at today, the first poet anyway, examines the life of soldiers, in not so much in the trenches, but what life as a soldier would have involved. And a lot of it would have been focused on this trench warfare. Now, I don't know if you can see, it's not a very clear picture, but here you have one of the poor soldiers hiding behind the trench, the front, near the front line, okay? He's hiding behind the trench, probably because he's got a rifle and he might be a sniper, I'm guessing here. And then if you look more closely, you'll see slumped bodies lying around. Here's somebody's feet. There are bodies lying in the trench, just lying dead in the trench. There was no time to take care of the dead. There was no time to take care of your health. And no wonder that there were these huge pandemics, outbreaks of flu and other diseases, which we'll look at now. Okay. Don't worry if you're late. I'm glad that you've joined. What is a genocide? So a genocide is where one group of people will try to annihilate another group of people. Okay, so not on a big scale like in the World War, but smaller kind of mass murders, if that makes sense. Okay. All right, so now, trenches of the 11th Cheshire Regiment at Ovillers-la-Boisselle on the Somme, July 1916. Oh, that was the picture that we just looked at. This was in France on the Somme. Okay, this was in July 1916. So now we're looking at the middle of the First World War. That was what that picture is. Now, military tactics developed before World War I failed to keep pace with advances in technology and had become obsolete. So in other words, you would have had commanders commanding armies to do things, but the way that they commanded or the way that they strategized did not account for the advances made in technology. And so yet again, the poor men or soldiers would have been at a disadvantage because of this. So these advances, these technological advances, had allowed the creation of strong defensive systems which out-of-date military tactics could not break through for most of the war. Barbed wire was a significant hindrance to mass infantry advances, while artillery, things that you can fire, vastly more lethal than in the 1870s, coupled with machine guns, made crossing open ground extremely difficult. Commanders on both sides failed to develop tactics for breaching entrenched positions without heavy casualties. So in other words, many soldiers were killed because of these types of technology. In time, however, technology began to produce new offensive weapons, such as gas warfare and the tank. Okay, so more development was made in that sense, and unfortunately, yes, it's true that war brings technological advancement. All right. Now, I just want to focus on this idea of the conditions the poor soldiers were in. Okay, the inhumane conditions, and this comes from history.com. You can look at this for yourself. Disease and shell shock were rampant in the trenches. So now we'll have a look at what this is in case you've ever heard of this before and you wondered. With soldiers fighting in close proximity in the trenches, usually in unsanitary conditions, infectious diseases such as dysentery, cholera, and typhoid fever were common and spread rapidly. Okay, these are all kind of related to the digestive system. Constant exposure to wetness caused trench foot, a painful condition in which dead tissue spread across one or both feet, sometimes requiring amputation. So obviously all the rain coming in, you're standing in this rainwater, there's nowhere else to go, that's your safe area supposedly, and so your feet are rotting in the water. Trench mouth, a type of gum infection, was also problematic and is thought to be associated with the stress of non-stop bombardment, okay, because when you're under stress, your immune system lowers, okay, and becomes more susceptible to things. As they were often effectively trapped in the trenches for long periods of time under nearly constant bombardment, many soldiers suffered from shell shock, the debilitating mental illness known today as post-traumatic stress disorder. And so these poor, oh, and here's another comment. They also had sand for coffee and rats for dinner. When things were getting really dire and they'd probably been running out of supplies, sand for coffee and rats for dinner. This is how desperate situations we're getting. Thank you for that contribution. And so, as you can see, this was not conducive to human life. This was not, this was just awful, horrific conditions. Whether you were winning or losing, it doesn't matter because the soldiers ultimately suffered either way. Okay, so we can see the terrible kind of inhumane conditions these poor soldiers were subjected to on both sides. So what I'd like to look at, the poem I'd like to look at is Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen. Some of you might know this poem. It's a very, very famous poem. Wilfred Owen is a very famous World War I poet. He did die in the war eventually. And this is one of his famous poems. I'm just going to make it a bit smaller so you can see it. Oh, okay, that's too small. So Anthem for Doomed Youth. Remember, always look at the title of a poem. What stands out for you here in this title? What stands out for you? Good. Yes, that word, doomed. Excellent. Has it got negative or positive connotations? Negative connotations. Yes, good. Negative connotations. Okay, and when we talk about connotations, we're talking about secondary associations. Good. Yes, it's negative. Absolutely. So this is not just a poem as far as the poet is concerned. No, this is actually an anthem. What is an anthem? What is an anthem? A national song. Good, yes. A country will have an anthem, and that's what you all sing together. So you expect an anthem to be uplifting, something that unites. But here it might have negative connotations because it's an anthem for doomed youth. This is the song they will be singing. Okay, and it's not a good thing. They are doomed. Something bad or negative will happen to them. So there is no hope. Okay, so we already get this idea of there being no hope. So let's have a look at this idea of an anthem. All right. I'm going to read through it once. Let's get an overall impression, and then we'll look at it a bit more closely. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can putter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs. The shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient mind, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. Okay. So, can you see elements? What two ideas are being mixed here? There are two main concepts that are being explored. Can you identify them? Good. Yes. One of them is funerals. What else? A song? No. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. Okay, so I'm not getting any other suggestions. Okay, there's two concepts. Yes, war, good. The way the men died, yes, that's related to death and to war. Okay, good. We're getting there. There are two things being explored. Funerals and warfare on a grand scale. Okay. How do we know this? Well, what passing bells? Passing bells refers to the bells that are rung for a funeral service or anything related to a church. When you hear this idea of bells, you should think about churches or alarms or something like that. But yes, generally when we're talking about passing bells, we're talking about the bells that are rung at a church for a funeral. For these who die as cattle, and then I can see how you want to bring on this idea of death rather than warfare. But the fact is they're dying as cattle. How does this then relate to the idea of warfare? Good, yes, they are slaughtered in numbers, just how cattle are slaughtered in vast numbers. Okay, so that's what this metaphor is doing. And remember, when you have a metaphor, you are making a comparison. You're comparing one thing to another thing. Okay, they die as cattle. And in fact, you could argue that that is a simile because of the word as. Okay, a simile is a type of metaphor. There's a comparison, they both compare, but a simile will use the words like or as. So let's say it's a simile even, all right? We can narrow it down even more. They die as cattle. They are slaughtered on a grand scale. And this is what is related to warfare, but this is just a hint of it at this point. As we move through this first part, you only get a hint of, the opening only gives a hint. But now we get more information. Only the monstrous anger of the guns. So the question is asked, what passing bells for these who die as cattle? Well, the only bells they're going to get is the monstrous anger of the guns. Okay, so he's juxtaposing, he's setting apart funerals and the etiquette of death, of acknowledgement, of respect to the dead, and actually the reality of warfare. Okay, only the monstrous anger of the guns. So we open with a rhetorical question, provoking thought, and then a suggestion is provided. Here, tension building up with that dash. This is a dash, it's not a hyphen because it's not in the middle of two words, not joining two words together, it's separating concepts, it's the dash. Dash, so we're waiting, it creates a pause, yes, what? Well, only the monstrous anger of the guns. What device is used here in this line? Only the monstrous anger of the guns. Good, yes, personification. Can guns be angry? No, this is generally a human trait, therefore it's personification. Why describe the guns like this? Why use this personification? What does it do? Okay, I don't want to run out of time, so I'm just going to go ahead. Now, personification or any device that is used is trying to make a specific point. And here, the fact that the guns are angry, it just emphasizes the violence, okay? It's just about showing how violent this entire situation is. Not just guns shooting. They sound angry. They're like monstrous. There's something inhuman. They're something almost inescapable. This anger. So it emphasizes violence. Okay. And perhaps even the monstrous part would emphasize the extent of the warfare, just how large and vast the scale of this warfare. Okay, so only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. Patter means to speak rapidly. Okay, you speak rapidly with patter. And hasty orisons. Orisons is another word for prayers. Okay, so we're still linking to this idea of a funeral, passing bells, prayers. Somebody says something, they usually speak about the deceased. But here, the only thing that is speaking is the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle. Okay, so note the word stuttering. Can anybody identify what that is? What device is used in stuttering, or what stuttering is an example of? Don't worry if you spell it wrong, it's okay. Onomatopoeia, good, yes. Stuttering is an example of onomatopoeia. Okay, and why do we say that? Because onomatopoeia is when a word reflects almost the action that is taken. Stuttering, you can always hear those guns firing. Stuttering. Okay, and then this alliteration on the R, rifles, rapid, rattle. Rattle is also an example of onomatopoeia, you could argue. Rattle. We hear the sound of those guns coming to life. Okay, and it's almost this technology that has been okay, it's the rifles here, so it's not machine gun fire, but it's constant fire. And this just emphasizes the chaos, the noise, probably inescapable noise. You cannot get away from it. The sound, good, yes. All right, so we have those opening lines juxtaposing the funeral and the warfare. Now we go back to this idea of the funeral. Okay, so yes, guns being used as a violent act, good suggestion. Yes, that's exactly what it's doing. Now, let's look at the next 4 lines. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning, save the choirs. Okay, so they don't get the kinds of, and I think mockeries here might pertain to something like rituals that we do in a funeral service. I did look at what it meant. No mockeries, no religious ritual versus the mud or stench or death of war. Okay, so let's not make any mockeries for them now by, you know, having these fancy funeral services, which is very civilized and humane, because ultimately they're dying in the mud. There's, you know, disease, stench. It's not a respectful kind of a death. It's not a dignified kind of a death. So let's not make any mockeries. No mockeries now for them. No prayers, nor bells, nothing fancy, nor any voice of mourning. Nobody to even notice they're dying until after the fighting is over for that day. Save the choirs, except save the choirs. Oh, so there's choirs. Oh, here we have a dash alluding to the nation of these choirs. And what are these choirs? Well, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells. Any comments here on the diction, on the word choice? Diction or word choice that is being used here? What stands out for you? Demented, good, yes. Demented, what an interesting word. Crazy, yes. Demented means something is utterly mad, utterly crazy, almost beyond crazy. It's demented. There is no room for rationalism here. And this insane sound of the bombs falling. Yes, these shells, these bombs. They are shrill, high-pitched. They sound crazy, and they are wailing, which is interesting. Wailing. That's also a form of onomatopoeia, I would argue, because it's almost like you can hear the wailing, you know, of these sounds, okay, falling. And wailing would also relate to the idea of a funeral, wouldn't it? Crying for help, yes. Crying, definitely. Wailing, yes. Interesting. Okay, so yet again, we have to draw on the senses here. There's the sense of sound that is mostly being explored, I would say, in this part of the poem. And thank you for your contributions, that was great. And bugles, calling for them from sad shires. What are bugles? Why is there a reference to bugles? Trumpets, good. But just any kind of trumpet? When do you ever hear bugles? Does anybody know? Okay, just because of time, sorry. It's used in war. Yes, bugles are generally used in military funerals. You might have seen a lot of American films where there's a funeral of a soldier, and then there'll be somebody playing that sad song on the bugle. And that's a military ritual for military funerals. So bugles, calling them from sad shires. Oh, good, it's when saluting the dead. Very nice. So it's a salutation. Yes, salutation, saluting the dead. Shire is a breed of horses. Yes, it's true. A shire is a kind of a horse, but here it's not so much horse. It's not referring to horses in this specific context here. It's about bugles calling out, bugles sort of acknowledging the fact that somebody has died from shires. Now, the Britain is made up of many shires. Okay, so you'll have Hampshire, Wiltshire, Buckinghamshire. Okay, so there's always some kind of regional small area that makes up a bigger area. And this makes it more human because it's the people in the shires who have lost their loved ones who will be acknowledging their death. Okay, so this makes it more human. It's a reflection on the other people who are affected by the deaths of these soldiers. Okay, not just the army themselves, not just the soldiers themselves. Okay, and yes, so it's land within Britain, the shires, the different shires that you get. Okay, we've got 4 minutes. Okay, so let's look at this. So I'm just going to say that this first part, this entire poem is actually a sonnet. which is usually associated to romance. If you look up Shakespeare's sonnets, you'll see they're quite romantic. They explore love. A sonnet is 14 lines, and you usually have an octet, which is 8 lines that open it up and put forward an idea, and then a sestet kind of acknowledges that octet or responds to the octet in some way. So 8 lines and 6 lines, and that's what's happening here. So putting forward this idea of death and warfare and no funeral for them, and then carrying on or extending this funeral imagery. Okay, what candles may be held to speed them all? Look at this reflection in structure of that questioning. So what passing bells, what candles may be held to speed them all? I don't know if any of you heard of that expression, God's speed be with you. It means to speed you to heaven, okay? It's religious, it's Christian language here. So what candles may be held to speed them all? Well, not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. In other words, these soldiers, or even the boys who are maybe related to these soldiers at their supposed funerals, not that there is a funeral, but anyway, these boys are going to be sent to slaughter, just as these soldiers, these boys, they're young, they're 18, 19, shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. So usually a candle is seen as some symbol of hope, but here it's shining the holy glimmers of goodbyes. Okay, so this alliteration, slowing the line down and giving it a more poignant melancholic feel. Could the holy glimmers be like tears? Absolutely, yes. Holy glimmers, yes, definitely. It's almost like an image of tears, something shiny and glimmery. Glimmer is something slight, so yes, it could be. So no hope for these, no hope for these boys. The candles that are lit for them or that acknowledge them, there's no hope there. There's just goodbyes. Not even a real goodbye, because they're far away in France fighting from wherever the Allies are based, usually Britain. And that's not to say the French didn't suffer in the same way. Obviously they did, and the Germans as well. So let's have a look at the next part. Sorry, I'm rushing again. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. This is a blanket that covers a coffin. Their flowers, the tenderness of patient minds who are the flowers at their funeral, are actually compared to these patient minds waiting for them, friends and family back home, waiting for their return. They never return, and so at each slow dusk, a drawing down of blinds. Remember, you didn't have technology where you could communicate easily. Nobody knew what was happening straight away. News took a long time to get back to their family and friends. And so all that could be done is at night. You're waiting, you're looking for the return of your son, and nothing. So putting down the blinds. This is also symbolic of night, death falling, those kind of things. Okay. So we've come to the end of the session. I did want to look at another poem with you, but we've run out of time. You can read that one for yourself. It's An Irish Airman Foresees His Death by W.B. Yeats. So look on the Poetry Forum for that. And then there is a little bit of an explanation or glossary of some of the terms that I've been using. But I think we've explored all of them. There's nothing that stands out that we haven't covered. Okay, so thank you very much for all your contributions.